You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Maddie.
Do you like horror movies?
I sure do.
Well, did you know that most horror movies are inspired by real-life horror?
Really? Like what?
Well, take The Shining, for instance. That's based on Stephen King's real-life addictions, or The Purge, which could be our country any minute now.
Oh, and The Strangers, which is based on a real-life murder. People should be talking about these things.
Hey, guys.
Oh, hey, Producer Michael.
Hi.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but somebody already is. It's you.
That's right. We are Friday the 13th, the podcast where we talk about horror in real life and horror in media, all from an LGBTQ perspective.
Because we gay, y'all.
We are proud members of the Legion Podcast Network, and we can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever your favorite podcasts are found.
And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Come along with us on this crazy journey, and as always,
Get slayed.
Welcome back to another episode of Fresh Hell Podcast. I'm Johanna.
And I'm Annie. You just heard the promo of Friday the 13th. The hosts, Andrew and Maddie, talk about fictional and real horror from an LGBTQ point of view, and I am really interested in checking this one out.
Awesome. I will check it out too, and I know some of my friends who will love this take on horror.
Yeah, mine too. So, Johanna, happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's the day before, so maybe some of our listeners are listening while they're baking desserts or doing some food prep, making up guest rooms, all the stuff I've been doing today. But yeah, happy early Thanksgiving to our American listeners, and happy belated Thanksgiving to our Canadian listeners. I just really love turkey. I love it. Turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy. Gravy. Everything with gravy.
I know that after Thanksgiving is always Black Friday, right?
Yes, right after we talk about how grateful we are and thankful for what we have, we run out at the crack of dawn the next morning and fight each other to buy more stuff at reduced prices.
Well, and you all definitely need more Fresh Hell t-shirts and hoodies.
Yes.
And that's why we are offering a Black Friday promotion. So if you are in our merch store from Friday until the 2nd of December and you use the promo code HELLION, then you will get a 10% discount.
Yeah.
Go and check it out. You will find the link on our webpage, freshhellpodcast.com, in our Facebook group, on our social media outlet. You're going to find it.
Yeah, definitely check that out. Every little bit helps. Yeah, so I know that as you're listening to this, a lot of you may also be flying today. You might be en route to your family Thanksgiving listening to us instead of the 3-year-old kicking your seat and screaming behind you.
Oh, God.
I know, every time with me. Speaking of travel, Johanna, I want you to know that I always pay attention to the flight attendants when they do their safety drills. I think it's really rude not to. Like, it bothers me when I see other people not paying attention, like, even if you fly enough to do the demo yourself.
I used to love to do the safety demo. Mostly we didn't do it because it's all shown on screens nowadays, but on the Canada Regional Jet, which was the smallest plane that I was working on, that was with 50 passengers, there was no screens, so we had to do the demo, and I think I can still do it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I bet you can. The life vest always seems like the most complicated bit. It's like that wrap and twist and cinch.
No, you know what was the most complicated part of it?
What?
Using the belt buckle to demonstrate how you open it with one hand and a finger just to look cool. You didn't use both hands if you were really good. You just...
Oh, I mean... It's all about the presentation, right?
Of course.
I love it. I always find the nearest exit, and I'll always make notes to myself, like, okay, 4 seats ahead to the left or 3 rows back and to the right or whatever.
That's really good, yeah.
I always do. And I do it in public spaces, too. I didn't used to be as paranoid about it, but a few, big catastrophes have happened, and then in America we have a mass shooting so often, so now it's like I also like to note places to hide as well as to exit, so it's never a bad idea. But anyway, I'm talking to you about all of this because today we're going to talk about a fire, and it's one of the worst in U.S. history. And it happened here in Boston 77 years ago tomorrow, November 28th, 1942. And that was the date of the absolutely terrible Coconut Grove fire in Boston. I used a lot of sources, but especially the official report by the Boston Fire Department, bostonfirehistory.org, the New England Historical Society, the National Fire Prevention Association, and firefighter.nation.com, and plus just a whole bunch more. You'll find everything in my sources.
I never heard of this one, but I have to say fires scare me really a lot. So I mostly try to avoid reading about them. That's why I probably didn't hear about it. And I don't know, I'm sure you can understand me. I'm always scared when I leave the house to run errands or do whatever, that the house catches fire while the dogs are at home alone. It's the worst. This kind of invasive thoughts, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Did I turn off the oven? Is there something lying on top of it? Could something catch fire?
Mm-hmm. No, I'm the same way. And we actually have these cling film stickers that go on the front and back doors. And it says, pet inside. And then so we used to have one that was said the pet's name and description. So it was Tucker.
I was thinking about getting them, but then Philip said something very true here. Here's a lot of burglars in the city.
Right.
And I don't think it's so good if they know the names of the dogs and that there are dogs inside. I read that people sometimes, took poison with them or whatever. And
oh, fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had, ours said, Tucker, breed Mastiff mix.
Yeah.
Notes. Can get bitey with people he doesn't know. It's our old dog. So it was I think a burglar would have picked a different house. Move along. But yeah, that's another scary thing to think about.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but I'm the same with fires. I get super nervous. I don't actually care, funnily enough. If no one's in the house, I'll leave the dryer running. But when we have dogs or anyone at home or anything like that, and dying in a fire is, I think it's the way that I'm most afraid of dying.
Yeah.
I really think I was probably burned as a witch in a former life.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, thank you. So, okay, this story, it's just terrible. So let's get into it. It is November 28th, 1942, and it hasn't quite been a year since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and America is at war. So 2 weeks earlier, in the early morning hours of November 15th, there was a fire in Maverick Square, Boston, known as the Maverick Square Fire, and it injured over 50 members of the Boston Fire Department and tragically killed 6 firefighters when a multi-story brick building, one of the walls collapsed, crushing and trapping people. So that had been absolutely devastating for the fire community. And then 1 week before the disaster we're going to talk about, they had actually had a massive civil defense drill. So they would practice things like blackout drills, covering every window in your home with black fabric, having people in the streets pull over and turn off car lights, mobilizing emergency personnel in hospitals, as well as the military in the event of a blitz-type bombing. But nobody knew at the time that they might need those skills so soon. Okay, so it's the night of Saturday the 28th, 1942, and it's Thanksgiving weekend. Thanksgiving is just past, and there's an absolutely huge college football game that day between Boston College and the College of the Holy Cross, which is located in Worcester. I'm kidding you, it's Worcester. Worcester, Mass. So by football, I mean American football. And this was a very extra special game because it's Thanksgiving weekend and there's a lot of football, Thanksgiving, turkey. It's a whole thing here. And this game was being played at Fenway Park, which is our baseball ballpark where the Red Sox usually play. And I actually said, hey, Paul, did you know that they did this? They used to have football games at Fenway. And he was like, babe, they still do. They still have football games and ice hockey games. So I was like, okay. So yeah, there were and there are other sporting events that take place there. Concerts too, I did know that. But this was one of the other sporting events. So the Boston College Eagles were expected to take the win easily, right? Everybody thought they were going to win. But in a completely shocking upset, the Holy Cross Crusaders beat Boston College by a score of 55-12. So for all you college football fans, this was absolute madness. It was shocking.
I have absolutely no idea what any of this means. I had a boyfriend once who tried to explain American football to me, but I still don't know anything about what's going on there. We watched the Super Bowl together one year, but I was mostly eating wings and then I fell asleep on the couch.
It's, I don't know. Everybody says it's a bit like rugby.
Yeah, I don't know we don't have rugby here neither. I mean, we do, but it's not popular. I know everything about soccer though, so.
See, I don't think it is like rugby. They're very different. Don't worry though, I'm not going to try to explain it to you. That's a whole different podcast, and there's probably one out there if care enough to learn. I wouldn't bother. It's enough to know that the two teams are just huge sports rivals, and the home team, Boston College, who everybody thought would win, lost, and lost by a lot. So nobody saw this coming, and there had been a planned celebration that was supposed to take place at the best supper club in Boston, the Cocoanut Grove. The mayor, Maurice Tobin, you might recognize that name. Charles Stewart jumped from the Tobin Bridge, named after him, rather than face time in prison for murder. Yeah. So Tobin was a BC alum, and he was planning to go to the party after, but when BC lost, they canceled the party at Cocoanut Grove, and lots of people who had planned to go made other plans last minute, but plenty of other people did show up. Some were football fans from both teams. Some were just regular people out having anniversaries and birthdays and out on dates. The cast of Irving Berlin's musical This Is the Army showed up for drinks, but I think most of them left before the disaster struck. Buck Jones, whose real name was Charles Gebhardt, he was a famous cowboy movie star of the time.
I know him.
Do you know him?
Mm-hmm.
I'd never heard of him. So he was there.
I think he was big in the 20s and 30s.
He was very big, yep. And so he was in town for a Boston Garden rally urging kids to buy war stamps, and he attended the game with Mayor Tobin. He actually wasn't feeling very well that night, so when the party was canceled and the team lost, he was actually kind of looking forward to going back to his hotel to just rest, but his people convinced him to go out and be seen, and so he went. And he was seated on this raised platform area where the stars were always seated so that they could be sure to be seen by everybody, and it was not so lucky for him. Okay, so let's talk about the Cocoanut Grove. Officially, there were no nightclubs in Boston in 1942, so the Cocoanut Grove, which is spelled with an A in its name, as far as I can tell, it's just different spellings.
Did you read about the difference for an hour, though?
I did. Do you have any questions?
No, I knew it. Continue, please. It's fine. It's fine.
So the Cocoanut Grove was it was a restaurant and supper club, definitely not a nightclub, built in 1927 by what I'm pretty sure was the mob, and it was located at 17 Piedmont Street in Boston. And this is a really small neighborhood with lots of little narrow twisty streets, and at the time, Piedmont was cobblestone. I'm not sure if it still is, but for local people, it's sort of between the Mass Pike and just a couple of blocks from the Common, sort of just behind the Back Bay Theater District area, just so locals know where I mean. There's a hotel there now. So despite prohibition, it did really well in the late 1920s. So I'm pretty sure that there was a speakeasy component, but I'm not certain. It might have just been, good, clean fun. Who can say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely was a speakeasy.
Right, totally a speakeasy. This place, like so many other places at the time, went through really rough patches in the 30s during the Depression, but it surged in popularity again when World War II began. People were just desperate to get away from the reality of life, right? And this was the place for the middle class to party. Plus, it felt like, I think there was a little bit of a racy component, like knowing about past mob ties. And it also reminds me a bit about, wanting to escape the war. If you've never seen the film Mrs. Henderson Presents, I cannot recommend it enough. Have you seen that one?
No, I don't think so.
It's about the windmill, which was it ended up being sort of like a nude review. And they stayed open all through the war. It was the only place. And their big claim to fame after was, during the Blitz, we never clothed. And it's all about how they got around having the artists, saying that it was art, not pornography. Mm-hmm. It's Judi Dench is in it. Oh God, what's his name? Is it Al Finney? It's so good. Can't recommend it enough. Okay. Back to Cocoanut Grove. So this is from the New England Historical Society. Quote, Boston mobster Charles, a.k.a. King Solomon, owned the club from 1931 to 33. He had hired such marquee acts as Rudy Valley, Sophie Tucker, Helen Morgan, and Jimmy Durante. But Solomon died in a gangland shooting in 1933, and his lawyer, Barney Wilansky, took ownership.
Okay, yeah, definitely a speakeasy.
I mean, right? This article goes on to say, unlike Solomon, Wolanski made a profit from the club. He slashed the entertainment budget, hired cheap underage employees, and cut corners on construction with unlicensed electricians and unfireproofed materials, end quote.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And there's a lot of talk about the local mobs and how Wolanski was able to cut corners because he was friends with the mayor. There are a few books in my sources if you want more information. They get really into like the background and the mob ties and the cronyism and all of that. But let's take a second to just talk about the layout. From the sky, it's kind of like 3 buildings combined in sort of a step shape, or like kind of like that Z-shaped tile in Tetris.
Sorry that I'm laughing. But that's the Tetris piece that always takes up too much space and nobody ever wants it.
It does. It's the worst.
My husband used to call me Trouble Tetris Stone in the beginning of our relationship because I make pretty much this shape while sleeping, and he used to have my elbows and knees everywhere. He got used to it though, so doesn't call me that anymore.
I love it. I love it. So I'll post some photographs, obviously, but if you're listening to this while you're driving or doing something that you can't, look at photos right away, the only thing you really need to know is don't think of it as a big rectangle, okay? It's kind of a warren of a space. So the main entrance was on Piedmont Street through a revolving door. The club itself was on 2 floors. The first or ground floor consisted of a large dining room area, and then there was a ballroom with a bandstand and a stage that rolled out for their stage shows. They had 2 stage shows a night, and then that stage would retract again to make it a bigger dance floor for regular dancing. There were also a whole bunch of other bar areas separate from the dining room and the ballroom. So it was like a full-on dining room, a full-on ballroom, and then a whole bunch of bars all in the same space. And then there was this restroom areas and coat check areas. And then the roof over the dining room could actually be retracted during warm weather to allow a view of the night sky, which I bet was amazing. I was on a cruise ship that had that once. I loved it. Yeah, but then the rest of the ceiling was draped in fabric to mimic the feel of the night sky. It was a tropical theme and had fake palm trees with paper palm fronds everywhere and just all kinds of highly flammable things decorating the space with highly flammable glue.
My God, that's so bad.
It's so bad.
I mean, it sounds amazing, but that's so bad.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as flammable ballerinas next to candles.
Oh, yeah. It's flaming ballerina bad. Yeah. It's bad. Okay, so once you made your way through this warren of spaces where the bathroom and the coat room were on the main floor, there was like another bar, and so you went around all the way to the far end of that bar, and like around the corner in a U-turn was a flight of stairs that went down to the Melody Lounge, and that was a more intimate space. There was a piano player and a singer, comedy, that kind of thing. I would imagine that would be like the romantic part. Also in the basement was the kitchen, freezers, and storage spaces, and in the basement, that is where the fire began. Now, many people reported that they had seen an employee screw in a light bulb, and that's when the fire started. Apparently, in the back corner of the lounge, a couple had been engaged in some, I believe the term is necking, maybe even a little bit of light petting. And we're not judging, it's fine. But he unscrewed the light bulb to give them a little bit more privacy. So around 10:15, a bartender notices that this light is out, and it looked like the lights were like set into coconuts, like fake coconuts. But anyway, so the bartender says, hey, go fix that light. And so he sent the busboy, Stanley Tomaszewski, over to fix it. And in order to see, he lit a match, and then he could see that the bulb, he looked at the bulb, tightened it, light came back on, blew the match out, got down, stepped on the match on the floor to make sure it was out, and went back to his work. Because he was busy. He was, in fact, incredibly busy. Really busy. Because the club had a maximum capacity of 460 people, and there were over 1,000 people there to have a good time.
That can't be good.
No, it's not good. I don't know if people are going to be able to hear this. There is some kind of storm happening right now. And so every so often there's like a rumble of thunder.
It's going to be the ambient sound.
Yeah, so if you hear there's some rain and wind and thunder happening here. So upstairs, the patrons are just packed in like sardines, right? They're waiting. One of the big show performances is running like 10 minutes late, so they're all waiting for that to begin. It's literally standing room only. People are packed in. And it wasn't long after Stanley fixed the bulb that the first sign of the fire was noticed. Flames appeared in the paper palm fronds of those big fake palm trees and met with the midnight blue satin-covered ceiling, and it ignited. And the only way out is back up that one narrow set of stairs. So we'll post links to the layout of the space, as I said. And to describe the fire, I'm actually going to read an excerpt from the official report because I just don't want to get any of this wrong. According to District Fire Chief John P. Vahey's November 1970 report to the Fire Commissioner, and I'm going with this one because scientific understanding of how fires work had improved from the original report, but I read that one too. That's in my sources, the full report from 1942. But this one is from the 1970 report about the fire. Quote, as the fire rushed up the stairway, it traveled near the ceiling and above the heads of the persons ascending to make their way out of the building. The movement of this fire and great volume of carbon monoxide gas generated by lack of oxygen was accelerated by the narrow 4 feet width of stairway, which acted like a chimney, adding a draft of suction to the room below. In the stairway, the partially unburned gas rapidly mixed with air and increased the temperature and rapidity of flow. The burning mass passed from the top of the stairway into a narrow connecting corridor. At this end of the corridor was an exit door leading to Piedmont Street. This door was locked the night of the fire. The other exit from the Melody Lounge was by means of a door used by waiters leading to a passageway to the kitchen. Located in this passageway was a door leading to an outside alleyway. This door was locked on the night of the fire. Fire appeared in the street floor lobby within 2 to 4 minutes after it was first seen in the Melody Lounge. It was described as traveling rapidly as a ball of fire below the ceiling and a yellowish or blue color. Most of the lights on the premises became extinguished immediately upon the appearance of the fire. The fire in the corridor of the foyer appeared to have been accelerated by a large ventilating fan placed over the further end of the caricature bar, acting to draw air from the foyer along the length of the caricature bar. As fire traveled through the lobby toward the caricature bar, it was soon followed by a thick cloud of smoke. The fire then traversed the length of the area containing the caricature bar. Wow, they really like to talk about the caricature bar.
I was thinking the same, like how many times?
How many times? So, listen, they're nothing if not thorough. There are other bars, so they are being very clear. So, okay, it continues. Some few persons, including persons coming from the basement Melody Lounge, passed through the revolving door on Piedmont Street before the mass of flames reached it. The door then appears to have jammed. There was a very great pouring of flames through the exit. The great majority of persons on the street floor had no warning of the fire until the flames actually appeared in the lobby. Upon reaching the main dining room, the flame, moving rapidly, swept high about the room near the ceiling, shortly followed by a cloud of dense smoke described by witnesses as acrid. The burning and decomposition of wall coverings once again produced material largely gaseous and capable of further combustion and very rapid movement. The great mass of partially burned gases spread from the main dining room and into the Broadway lounge. The rapidly pouring mass of burning gaseous material appeared to have been depressed from its high elevation within the premises in order to pass through the exits. Persons attempting to pass through exits were overcome by the great heat of fire and of the gaseous material pouring through them at the time. The fire, within 5 minutes after it was first seen in the basement room, entirely traversed the street floor of the main building and had passed to the entrance of the Broadway lounge. Until such time as they were brought under control, the flames poured out of the exits on Piedmont Street, Shawmut Street, and Broadway. So, basically, in my mind, it's like one horrific backdraft nightmare after another. People who survived said it was just an enormous fireball and the ceiling was on fire. And there were flame retardant asbestos tiles on the ceiling, but they were held to the ceiling with highly flammable glue. And so it was raining fiery glue.
Yeah, backdraft was what came to my mind immediately. It's like everything that could possibly work together to create the worst fiery nightmare was there the ceiling fan, like, oh my God, it's bad.
I know. It's so awful. Now, the one lucky thing was that when this was happening, Boston Fire are already out really close by taking care of a car fire. And so they had put out this car fire, and that's when they kind of hear a commotion, and they look over and they see the first people evacuating from the Cocoanut Grove, and the firemen hear the shouts and they see people running toward them yelling and screaming. And so they did what first responders always do. They ran straight toward the thing that everyone else was running away from. Yeah. And they immediately realized how bad things were. So when they got there, they found heavy smoke with people still escaping the building. And this is from just a quick timeline from one of these sources. At 10:20 p.m., the Boston Fire Alarm Office received box 1521 at Church and Winchester Streets. That was pulled by a civilian. The fire chief was on scene immediately and ordered his aides to skip the second and request a third alarm via fire alarm telegraph from box 1521, which was transmitted at 10:23 p.m., followed by a fourth alarm at 10:24 p.m., and a fifth alarm was transmitted at 11:02 p.m. I just wanted to include that for first responders listening who probably understand the significance of that succession better than we might. And the fire, thanks to them, was out pretty quickly. It's just that nobody was prepared for the absolute carnage that was waiting for them inside. There were clues, though. For example, there were women with gashes on their legs and men with the back of their shirts missing and ripped up, their backs all scratched up. And that was all from patrons that were caught in the crush of people trying to get out and trying to grab onto them for help. This whole thing it's like stressful to even think about, This is almost as scary as fire to me. It didn't used to bother me, and I'm not remotely claustrophobic. Like every other year, I am neck deep to my knees in a 2-hour MRI, and it's fine. I fall asleep. But being in a crowd really bothers me now. And I know it's PTSD, but I don't like it.
Yeah, it's horrible. When we are out in the city and there's a crowded place, like Philip has to go in front of me and I'm just behind his back, I can't stand it anymore.
No, I'm the same.
These kind of things get worse and worse for me when you get older.
Yes, I really don't like it. Yeah. No parades. Nope. I'll just watch from TV, from on my TV.
Concerts, always just with seats. I don't go like standing in a crowd anymore at concerts.
No, only in seats. Yeah. Yep. All right. So one of the first investigations that was done by the Navy, which was actually probably for the best. I think a lot of people wanted an independent study of what happened because there was such a history of mob activity and cronyism. And I'm not sure people would have trusted an official report immediately. You know what I mean? Daniel J. Fleming, this is an article from an article he wrote for the National Archives, quote, on December 10th, the board concluded, this is the Naval Board, concluded its investigation and issued its findings of facts and opinion. The board identified that, as of the date of their findings, 39 servicemen, 31 Navy, 5 Coast Guard, 3 Marine Corps had died as a result of the Cocoanut Grove nightclub fire, while 19 Navy, 8 Coast Guard had sustained injuries. The casualties at the club had resulted mostly from either asphyxiation to the heavy toxic smoke filling the building or burns sustained from the fire itself. All of these servicemen had been on authorized leave from their duties. The board also determined the significant loss of life was exacerbated by the building's lack of effective exits. None of the club's exits were marked, and those exits that were known to the public, such as the main revolving door, which became blocked in the mad rush to evacuate. While service doors allowed many employees and a small number of patrons to escape, most customers had no knowledge of these passageways and would not have known to use them. One exit was equipped with a, quote, panic lock designed to release its door open in the event of an emergency. However, the lock had been overridden by a bolt securing the door shut, rendering the exit useless. During the post-fire inspection of the club, another exit was discovered to have been removed and replaced by a brick wall. The public and the media suspected that Walensky had locked or blocked a number of the club's exits in order to deter deadbeat patrons from attempting to evade paying their tabs.
I don't even want to think about this. I told you I used to work in a huge club in Mexico that held around like 2,000, 2,500 people every night on average. The thought of locked emergency exits, it just gives me chills. It's the worst. That's a nightmare.
It's horrific, yeah. And so some of the exits were blocked during speakeasy days, I think, to make it so they couldn't be raided. And then I think other exits were bolted shut during the Depression to prevent people from slipping out without paying. And then the rest were just hidden by fabric. And apparently the lights went out like the moment the fire started. You know, it would have been pitch black. And there were even these huge plate glass windows and other windows, but they were boarded over and covered in fabric and then like painted on the outside. So people didn't even know they were there. It would have just been pitch dark. It would have been just unimaginable.
Yeah, and especially if you didn't know the layout of the place, you just stood no chance to get out.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the thing, what I was saying in the beginning, like it wasn't just a big rectangle where you know if you run, back or, whatever. It was, yeah. So let's talk about some more of the terrible things that happened with this. Part of the problem first responders faced was that people were trying to help. So they just randomly pulled over on these already very narrow streets, making it really hard to get emergency personnel in. But, gotta say, Boston did what it always fucking does. Boston mobilized. Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, police, fire, everyone was on scene, doing triage, carrying victims out of the buildings. Priests began to show up to administer last rites. And I actually mentioned to my parents, I was talking to them last night, going over the Thanksgiving menu, and when I mentioned to them that I was doing this story, they were like, oh yeah, great Uncle Ed was there. So my mother's uncle, he was one of the Jesuits in my family. Mom's uncle, mom's side are actually all Irish Catholic priests and nuns. My grandfather was the only one who married. But the city of Boston was and still is predominantly Catholic, either Irish or Italian. The guilt is the same, but I think the food's a little different. Like the Italians get their starch in pasta and the Irish get them through their potatoes. And I'm honestly a fan of both. I will literally have ordered meals that were macaroni and cheese and mashed potatoes. So newspaper delivery trucks, private citizens, taxis all showed up to take people to hospitals. You name it, they did it. It was pretty amazing. And I've got to say, like any city, Boston isn't without its problems. We've got plenty of problems. But one thing Bostonians are exceptionally good at is mobilizing in a crisis. You need all hands on deck? You got it. You need us to hide in our homes while cops come door to door post-marathon bombing? No problem. Shut the fucking city down until the cops find the bombers and let us know when it's safe to go back to the bars.
Yeah.
No problem. Seriously, though, it's a pretty amazing city when it comes to that kind of stuff. There's a WGBH forum, that's our Boston Public Radio, and they did a forum presentation about this, and I'm going to link to that as well. And they make a great point in that there was a huge laundry list of things that went wrong with this fire, but a better response time wasn't one of the what ifs. They were there immediately. It's just the people that were inside couldn't get out. Someone fell into that revolving door early, and then the only other unlocked doors opened inward. And so they ended up getting blocked by panicking victims. And then as this happened, especially with that revolving door, so people made it out thinking their loved ones were immediately behind them and then actually watched through the glass in horror.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, they watched their loved ones, collapsing from smoke inhalation or catching fire. You can't even imagine, right? Some did make it out early. Some followed employees out the back way through kitchens. Some cleverly and successfully hid in the meat lockers and walk-in refrigerators. A couple got out a basement window. One sailor urinated on his handkerchief and put it over his face and made it out. And I think a few women did the same, but with water. They dumped their water from the table onto their skirts and just lifted them up and held them over.
That's some quick thinking right there.
Yeah, I know. It's really good. And this is before smoke alarms were a thing, too. Marshall Cole, he was a 16-year-old dancer that was getting ready to go on that big stage show. And he was on the second floor. So the second floor is where the green rooms and dressing rooms were. It wasn't a space that was open to the public. When he heard the commotion, he peeked downstairs, looking down into the main ballroom area. And he saw a wicked commotion that he thought was a brawl between the two rival football teams until a fireball shot up the stairs toward him. He and several other performers, he said all the showgirls, they made it out onto the roof. And then him and another guy held a ladder while the showgirls, because the ladder only went halfway down. It wasn't long enough to reach all the way down. So they got the showgirls down that way. And then he and his buddies waited. And sure enough, the fire department were there and they were rescued by the fire department, got off the roof. But at every doorway, there was just a pile of bodies, both living and dead. And it was like a 6-foot tall log jam of people preventing escape for anyone. Nobody could get out. and now the rescue crews also couldn't get in. So like I said, it was the fire department who broke through those windows that patrons didn't even know were there, and they started to remove bodies. First responders and volunteers are just carrying them one at a time across cobblestones through a sea of people, just laying all over the place, getting people that were still breathing into ambulances, into the back of newspaper trucks, lining the dead up in lines on the street and in makeshift morgues. It's beyond. We have a lot of photos to show you. So according to the Boston Fire Historical Society, quote, Boston City Hospital received 300 victims in 1 hour, averaging 1 victim every 11 seconds. This volume exceeds the treatment rate encountered in London hospitals during the Blitz. Mass General Hospital received 114 victims in 2 hours. Off-duty staff were called in at both Boston City Hospital and Mass General Hospital, while volunteers provided additional assistance. A temporary morgue was established in film distribution garage nearby the Grove. A number of presumed dead victims were sent directly to either the northern mortuary or southern mortuary. Several presumed dead victims dropped off at the morgue were still actually alive. They were moved to the hospital and survived. At the morgues, staff and volunteers worked to identify the deceased. Identifying female victims was difficult because personal identification was usually kept in purses or handbags, which became separated from the owners in the panic and confusion of the fire. And yeah, we have photos of lines of people outside morgues, like long lines of people waiting to walk through to see if they can recognize their missing loved ones. And if they aren't at this morgue, then there's a second morgue to go to and walk through. And then if all else fails, dental records. So there are a lot of absolutely heartbreaking stories of people who died and people who survived the fire, and there's no way I could do them all. Here are a few of those. Anne Clark was 16. She and her boyfriend, Fred Sharby Jr., had attended the football game and then gone on to the Coconut Grove with their parents, Clyde and Mabel Clark, and Fred and Hortense Sharby. Isn't Hortense a great name? I feel like you never hear it anymore.
That was the name of the daughter of Josephine,
Oh.
the wife of Napoleon.
Okay.
Hortense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good name.
It is. And sadly, only Anne and her boyfriend's mother, Hortense, survived. So Anne lost both of her parents and her boyfriend, and Hortense lost her husband and only child. So awful. Movie star Buck Jones, who you remember, he died 2 days later from the burns he suffered.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I didn't know that he died in a fire. Wow.
Yeah, 2 days later, too. Oh, God. I can't even imagine how painful. They say that burns are like the worst.
Yeah.
You know, and he left behind a wife. I want to say his daughter was in her early 20s. Then there were the 4 Fitzgerald brothers from the town of Wilmington, Massachusetts. Their mother got one call after another that night, confirming that all 4 of her sons who had gone had died in the fire. And I read that the town put up a statue of them on the green.
Oh my God, can you even imagine? Poor family losing 4 children in one night.
I know.
Oh my God.
You just can't imagine it. And then there were some strange reports. There's a report of a woman who was found still holding the telephone in a phone booth. So she looked perfectly fine, standing upright, but she was kind of slumped against a wall. But yeah, she was dead. And then another fireman reported that when he had gotten downstairs, there was a young lady sitting at a downstairs table who looked totally fine. Her hand was still wrapped around her drink glass, and she was dead. So it was a flash fire, and it was just so hot and fast that some people died of asphyxiation almost immediately. Others on the street or who accompanied friends or relatives to hospital, they looked unscathed. They had been there with someone else who was more injured, so they were with them.
Yeah.
And they looked fine, and then all of a sudden they dropped dead because their lungs just stopped working. Then there was the story of, this is the worst for me. Francis and Grace, I think it's pronounced Caterna, was the last name. I hope that's correct. So they were waiting for the floor show to start when they smelled smoke, and they got up and tried to escape, but in the panic, they became completely separated in the crush of people, which, when you think about that, that's happened to Paul and I constantly. It's all the time where you get completely separated, and it's like, well, I'm just going to keep going until the first space where I can just stop and wait for the other person all the time. And that's what happened here. Francis was carried out in a wave of people who made it out. Grace did not get out. She died. So Francis was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, I think, recovering from burns that he sustained. But once he was allowed to go home, the grief and PTSD became too much for him. And thankfully, he was honest with his family, who were very worried for his mental health. And so they had him checked back into the hospital, but this time for psychological reasons. And they thought he seemed to be improving with the help of therapy when on January 9th, 1943, he jumped through a closed hospital window to his death on the street below. And it was either, some reports said the 4th floor, some said the 9th, but hopefully it was instantaneous because it's just heartbreaking. All right, but let's talk about some of the medical advances that were made as a result of this fire because it's astonishing and it's nice when something good happens from terrible things, right? I read a bunch of articles on this, but found an article by Peter Andre Smith for Business Insider, which was an unexpected source, but it really was the most succinct, so I'm going to read portions of this to you. The title of the article is How the Largest Nightclub Fire in U.S. History Became a Milestone in Modern Medicine. Quote, more than 100 survivors went to Boston City Hospital, where standard treatment for burns was to cut off blisters and bathe patients in tannic acid, which caused the tissue to harden and thus keep out infectious organisms. But at Massachusetts General Hospital, the 39 survivors who lived long enough to be treated underwent an experimental protocol. Under the direction of surgeons Oliver Cope and Francis Moore, patients were wrapped in gauze coated with petroleum jelly. The hope was that this would also prevent infection, but it could be applied more quickly and wouldn't damage the patient's skin. Burn wounds disrupt the skin's ability to regulate evaporation. As a result, burn victims can quickly lose large quantities of water and plasma, the fluid portion of blood, causing many of them to go into shock. At both hospitals, physicians tried to carefully assess the fluids that their burn patients would need and administered donated plasma, a medical technology that was just then 4 years old. But how much plasma to administer was still a matter of some guesswork. Cope and Moore would later publish a landmark 1947 paper establishing a formula for fluid replenishment based on treating 19 Cocoanut Grove survivors. Their formula was based on the total surface area of burn wounds in addition to the volume of urine and liquids that had been wrung out of patients' bedsheets. After 1 month, a third of those treated for burns at Boston City Hospital were dead from complications, but none died of burn wounds under the experimental protocols at Mass General Hospital. Those survivors at Mass General Hospital received another novel treatment. Burn victims, especially those receiving skin grafts, were vulnerable to staphylococcal infections. In early December, under police escort, the pharmaceutical firm Merck & Co. rushed 32 liters of a medication containing penicillin from New Jersey to Boston. The antibiotic, originally discovered in 1928, was expected to offer a safeguard against infection, but penicillin existed only in an unrefined liquid broth, and while the effects of these crude intramuscular doses had proven inconclusive, its use nearly doubled the number of civilians treated with no reported side effects. Publicity about penicillin soon reinvigorated efforts to mass-produce the new drug. As the authors of a 2016 review in Journal in Burn Care and Research put it, the conceptual advances made in treating the victims of the fire have, quote, have saved far more lives than were lost in the event, end quote. So, that last bit about penicillin also made more sense about why Helen List was treated with malaria rather than penicillin.
Yeah, it totally does. If you haven't listened to it yet, go and check out our episode about John List.
Yeah.
So, okay, are you saying it was thanks to this horrible fire that penicillin was mass-produced?
Yeah, it seems at least in part. It seems like, yes. It sounds like they were using it as kind of a Hail Mary. No pun intended, because people were dying of infections, right? And as complications from their burns. And so these people ended up being kind of an unplanned clinical trial because they literally had nothing to lose, right? It was like they were dying, they had to try something. And it turned out that this worked with no toxic side effects. So they ended up being able to help speed up mass production, and it started to get used a lot more often with the troops. So that's my understanding of it anyhow. If I'm way off, please let me know. You know, I always genuinely am curious if I want to know. The people that I talked about before, who I said looked perfectly fine and then were suddenly dead, they would have died of pulmonary edema from the material that was used to make what was essentially a warehouse look like a tropical paradise. Just so much faux leather. And all that burning material created a very toxic gas and lethal pulmonary edema. So carbon monoxide poisoning was another big cause of death. But there were also medical breakthroughs made in mental health. So Eric Lindemann was a German-American psychiatrist for Mass General, and he did the first ever study on how grief affects us. He interviewed survivors of both World War II and the Cocoanut Grove fire. And by survivors, I mean people who survived the war and relatives of people who died in the war, and the same with the fire. Also, the Austrian doctor, Alexandra Adler, her detailed study on 500 survivors of the Cocoanut Grove fire is some of the earliest research that was done on post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow, yeah. She was the daughter of Alfred Adler. He's one of the fathers of psychoanalysis.
Yes.
I know it's weird, but I always get a little bit excited when I hear of an Austrian connection in one of our stories.
Of course you do.
As long as it's not the bad guy.
I mean, seriously. But no, yeah, he was the father of the inferiority complex. And yes, his daughter, Dr. Alexandra Adler, discovered that many of the survivors, they suffered from long-term grief, as well as changes in personality, such as guilt, diminished vitality, an increase in sleep disturbances, and anxiety. Hey, I can personally attest to all of her findings. PTSD sucks. It's been like 15 years for me, and now I'm like, maybe it's time to get a dog about it? I don't know. All right. Oh, side note, guess who Dr. Adler worked with in Austria before coming back here?
Who?
Julius Wagner Wareg. Is this guy like trolling us from beyond? Should we change the name of our show to 6 Degrees of Julius Wagner Wareg?
Is this our life now?
I think it is.
Is this it?
Yeah.
Full circles, people. We are going full circles.
All the time. So, upside though, these people didn't die for nothing. You know, what they went through did lead to studies that saved so many lives. But there's one more victim we have to talk about. I can't do this story and not tell you about Clifford Johnson. He was a 22-year-old young man serving in the Coast Guard, and he was there with a girl that night with his date. They got separated in the beginning of the panic, like so many people did, and apparently he ran back into the burning nightclub over 4 times trying to find her. Every time he'd carry out a different victim, and he didn't know that she had safely escaped. And he eventually either collapsed or the doors got jammed and he couldn't get back in.
He's a hero.
Yeah, big time.
Please tell me he made it out alive. Please tell me he survived.
He did. So this is amazing. He had 3rd-degree burns over more than half of his body. And he became at that time the most severely burned person at 55% to survive. In fact, nobody with burns over more than 30% of their body had ever survived. He was a medical miracle. Dr. Newton Browder did thousands of pinprick skin grafts, and he used local Gillette razor blades. Do you know Gillette in Austria?
Yeah, we know Gillette.
They're everywhere, right? So that's Boston. So like our football team, the New England Patriots, they play at Gillette Stadium, the world headquarters. I'll point it out when you're here. But so yeah, they use these straight razors, just the old-fashioned straight razors by Gillette. And he used these straight razors, which it's so rudimentary and so painful, right? To do these tiny little skin grafts. But yeah, Dr. Browder and Dr. Charles Lund, they developed the Lund and Browder chart, and it's still used today for treating victims to determine how much of their body has been burned. And it was all done because of the victims of the Cocoanut Grove fire. So M.R. Montgomery writes in a May 92 article for the Boston Globe, where they're talking about Dr. Stanley Levinson. She writes, quote, "The leading cause of death, both at the scene and among the 39 who died inside City Hospital, was not burn wounds, but smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. Indeed, most of the severely burned did not survive long enough to enter City. The only other large group of patients were treated at Mass General. One severely wounded exception was a Coast Guardsman, 21-year-old Clifford Johnson." Levinson, in an interview before the reunion began, remembered the young Johnson well. Quote, "He was a hero. He'd gotten out quickly. He was near one of the few open exits, and he then went back in 5 or 6 times, carrying people out, and then collapsed and was burned severely. Johnson, in fact, was burned over 50% of his body, and half of that was burned through to the bone. He would be, at the time, the most severely burned patient to ever survive." Quote, "We had so little technology," Levinson recalled. "One respirator on each floor at best. The technology for studying blood gases and chemistries didn't exist anywhere. We were given oxygen directly through green rubber tubes. Even antibiotics were almost unknown except for the earliest sulfa drugs. The nutritional needs of burned patients were not understood. The treatment of the wounds consisted of little more than painting them with sterilizing and protective mixtures of aniline dyes. What pulled the patients through, including Clifford Johnson, was intensive nursing. Quote, you simply kept them going, kept them breathing, getting them to cough, urging them on, physically clearing their airways, lending moral support. We had great attending doctors," Levinson said, "residents, medical students, and most of all, we had wonderful nurses. Clifford Johnson had 2 nurses at a time, 24 hours a day, and sometimes there would be a Coast Guard corpsman too. All the patients got 24-hour one-on-one nursing as long as they needed it." End quote. And that's amazing. Seriously, can we get a shout out to our nurses listening? Because I'm sincerely sorry I darken your door so often, but I've never had a bad nurse, and I've had so many. They're the best. And also, let's raise a glass to Dr. Stanley Levinson. So he graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1941. And during that time, he'd helped develop the oxygen masks that were used by bomber pilots during World War II. He was very skilled in pulmonary medicine, and he was the first to study and totally revolutionized the way that fire victims were treated. Because of him and because of the victims of this fire, literally countless lives have been saved on the front lines of war, firefighters, and fire victims today. He was even on site consulting after the September 11th attacks. He passed away in 2012 at age 95, so a big cheers and thanks to him, a very great mind, a great doctor who is, really responsible for saving countless lives. So, yeah. Good guy. Yeah, he's a complete miracle, this kid that survives. After 2 years, he left the hospital married to his nurse, Marion Donovan.
Aww.
I know. Isn't that the best? And now I'm going to ruin it for you. 14 years later, on December 19th, 1956, he was a fuel oil delivery man in Missouri when his truck skidded off the icy road and crashed and caught fire, and he was trapped in the cab and burned to death.
Oh, fuck.
I know.
That's Final Destination.
I know. For me, that one is like, when I was writing up my notes, I was crying. I kept texting you going, this is so sad. This was a heavy.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, all right. Let's talk a little bit about who was responsible before we finish up with more fun about fire codes. So, an inspection for fire safety had been done a week before the fire, and it passed. Frank Linney, the fire inspector, was found not guilty. In fact, only one person was found responsible. So, when the fire was happening, when everybody was dying in a literal hellscape, the club's owner, Barney Walensky, was resting comfortably at Mass General Hospital. He had suffered a heart attack 2 days before the fire. He ended up being the only person convicted on 1 count of manslaughter, which is like, what the fuck? He was sentenced to 12 to 15 years in the Charlestown State Prison, but was pardoned by then Governor Maurice Tobin after serving 3.5 years because he had terminal cancer. So he died in 1947, about 3 months after his release at age 50.
Okay, I don't know yet how I feel about any of this, but I think he was a greedy bastard.
Oh, he was a totally greedy bastard. He kept saying all the time, he wished he had died in the fire with everybody else. And maybe he did. I mean, listen, it's very, they're going to say, you're being too nice to the bad guys. But, lots of people do things all the time that they don't think is ever gonna...
Yeah.
Literally no one could have imagined anything this bad.
It's not like he was, ha ha ha, if there's ever a fire, I don't care, I don't give a fuck. He didn't think this would ever happen.
Exactly. Yeah. But I agree. It was absolutely greed that caused all of those deaths. Yeah. And so here are just some of the codes that were put in place after this fire. Flammable decorations and inward swinging exit doors were banned. So...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So much of this is going to be like, well, duh, but yeah. Exit signs were required to be visible at all times. So you had to have battery backup for your exit lights like we do now. So if the lights go out, you can still see where the exits are. It was mandated that any revolving door either had at least one normal outward swinging door next to it, or it was retrofitted to permit, and most people have maybe seen this, so that on revolving doors, it's like it's like there's 4 pieces that form a cross shape, so you can fold 2 of the doors flat.
Yeah.
So that it's like 2 openings. I don't know if everyone will have necessarily seen that, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, so that, let's see, what were some of the other things? Yeah, so exit doors had to be clearly marked, be unlocked from within, be free from blockages by drapes or furniture or supplies, also placement of emergency lighting and sprinklers. And actually, this case against Walensky, it's still cited today in criminal and civil suits involving criminal negligence. So it was the first case where someone knowingly operating under unsafe conditions was charged with manslaughter. Each of the families were given $150.
Okay, I want to say what, but first I need to know how much that converts to nowadays.
Yeah, you can say what. It was about $2,300 today, so not enough to even cover the funeral. Yeah.
Wow.
Right. Yep.
That's shocking.
Not that money makes you feel any better, but like...
No, but I mean...
But losing someone you love and then literally not having the money to pay for...
That's a slap in the face.
It really is. It's so upsetting. Something else that was upsetting. So that busboy, Stanley Tomaszewski, he was absolutely crucified in the press to the point where he actually had to go into hiding with police protection at a local hotel. And he remained absolutely certain that he did not cause the fire. He had actually gone down the following morning. He went to the Boston Police Department to immediately give a statement. And the official cause of the fire was actually listed as unknown for decades until 1997, when it was determined that the flash fire was caused by extremely flammable methyl chloride gas that was leaking from a faulty refrigerator in a service area near the downstairs Melody Lounge. So usually Freon was used, which I guess is a lot safer, but Freon was being saved for the war. And so this much more toxic, flammable, dangerous gas was filling that space. And then they think there might have been a spark from an electrical problem. A lot of people think that, you know, you have to imagine behind that drapes. I'm imagining the fucking Griswold Christmas where it's like one thing plugged into another thing, plugged into this thing, and that's all plugged into this. And I bet that's what it was. And it was just all fucking covered up by faux leather and blue. It's just, yeah. Okay. So I don't know if I've actually said yet how many people died that night.
No.
I think I have not.
I'm waiting for that information.
The final death toll kept growing until it finally reached 492 people.
Wow.
Yeah. It's possibly more because there were others, I'm sure, who died by suicide as a result of PTSD or who suffered from serious respiratory illnesses for the rest of their lives just because of what they inhaled that night. But the official number of dead and recovered that immediately during that was 492 dead, 166 injured enough to require hospitalization. The official maximum capacity of the club was 460. And 492 people died. So let that sink in for a minute. It's crazy. It's the second deadliest fire ever in the history of the United States. The worst is Chicago's Iroquois Theater Fire, which happened on December 30th, 1903. And of the 603 people who died, they were almost all children. So I think probably we're not going to be covering that one for a while. And because I know someone will bring this up, the attacks on the World Trade Center don't count because they're considered a combination fire and collapse event, like the fire I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Now, I wish I could say we really learned so well from this that it never happened again, but it did. At the Station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island on February 20th, 2003. I was in the UK when that fire happened, and it was all over the news in England. So I imagine our listeners around the world might remember that awful fire, which claimed the lives of 100 fans who had gone to see Great White perform that night, and it injured about 200 more. It's way too soon to cover that episode, especially since a lot of the same issues came up.
And you'd think safety regulations are taken more seriously nowadays. I guess they are still very often just dismissed, like nothing's gonna happen.
Right.
Wow. Annie, this was horrible. I mean, you did an amazing job, but the story is horrible.
It's horrible.
It's awful. It might give me nightmares, actually.
Yeah, thanks. It's no, I know it is. It's really awful. And it's funny because I just really hadn't heard of it. And when I mentioned it, Paul was like, oh, I heard about it. I remember them talking about it during the station nightclub fire. And it was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is the story. And it seems like I was surprised when I mentioned it to my parents because my dad wasn't born yet and my mom had just been born. So, but of course, because my mother's uncle was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a film about this. There's going to be a screening, I think, coming up in New Bedford in December. We're going to post a link to that. I believe it's called 6 Locked Doors. All right. So I thought this year, let's, as far as something good, we could say something we're thankful for, which is a tradition we have in America. So because I have talked nonstop this episode, would you please go first?
You know what? I love this tradition. We don't celebrate Thanksgiving here in Austria, and Austrians are famous for complaining about every little meaningless thing. So thinking about things you're thankful for is a great exercise for me, actually. Wait, can I only say one thing? I hope not. I have more things, I think.
Yeah, no, you can have as many as you want.
Okay. Of course, I'm thankful for my amazing husband. I think I couldn't wish for anyone better to go through life with me. He's not only my husband, he's my best friend.
Oh.
I'm so thankful for having Jem and Lila in my life. They make me laugh every day, and especially Jem and I, we have a more special connection. He came to me at a moment in my life when I was not doing so great, and I think we both needed each other, and I think we both helped each other. And I'm thankful for all my family and friends, of course. But this year I'm also thankful for having you, Annie.
Oh no, don't say nice things to me. You're going to make me cry.
Well, it's true, and I'm so thankful that you started doing this podcast with me, and you're amazing. You know that I love you. I love your glass half full view on things. It's always good for me. I can learn a lot from you in that thing. And I have the feeling that you never judge me, which I'm so thankful for.
Never.
So thank you for being my friend.
Oh.
And of course, I'm so thankful for every single person out there who is listening to us. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Now you're making me cry. I'm also very, very thankful for each and every one of you listening. And I hope you know how thankful we are for you. And yeah, always thankful for Paul, especially this year. He's had a lot to take care of because my health really hasn't been great. And yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for you. IHOP. You know it. But yeah, but tomorrow it's not only Thanksgiving, and we'll be joined this year by my aunt and my cousin on my late husband's side. They're coming from the UK, but this Thanksgiving is also on my biological mother's birthday. So I want to wish her a very happy birthday and tell her how much I love her and always have. I'm not sure you know all about this, but I don't know if this has ever come up on the podcast, but I'm adopted. You always see those memes with the dog going, I'm adopted. But yeah, I'm adopted. I managed to find my biological mother a few years ago, but I was actually really worried about upsetting the life she might have made for herself. You know, you don't want to make their life any more difficult. So I almost didn't get in touch. And I'd never really had the feeling something was missing from my life, but my doctors really wanted a medical history. And I had always really wanted to say thank you and just let her know that she made the right decision, because I think that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And I was raised in a really wonderful, loving family. So I found her and I sort of carefully reached out, and she was thrilled to hear from me. Her husband knew all about me, and we really never looked back. She's incredibly kind and loving and just absolutely one of the strongest people I know. And if it weren't for her and how selfless she was, then I wouldn't have my family. And I can't. Sorry. Sorry. I'm fine. I just can't imagine not having them. You know, my sister is also adopted, and our parents always raised us to just be very thankful that the women who had us loved us enough to give us up. And that's something I think you don't understand so much until you get older. And now it's great. I have this huge biological family, as well as all of my in-laws, which has been wonderful. And so I'm just very, very thankful for my family, my whole huge family. I'm just so thankful that I have so many people in my life that I really, truly love, including you. My cup runneth over. IHOP. All right. So And now, because I need to stop crying, and it's the Thanksgiving episode, fun fact, I also discovered that I am a direct descendant through my biological mother to William Bradford, Mayflower Pilgrim, who was at the first Thanksgiving in the Plymouth Bay colony that he founded. He is my 11th great-grandfather. So we're bringing it right on back to Thanksgiving again. And my biological mother's husband is a wonderful guy named Jim, and he's a retired fireman and a superb supplier of venison, which was served at, that's right, the first Thanksgiving. So,
full circles. I'm telling you, full circles.
Circle.
That should be the name of our podcast.
There you go.
Full circles.
Bringing it back around. So, if you listen to this before Thanksgiving, or the next time you're with loved ones, just raise a glass or light one up or say a prayer, whatever your thing is. You do you. But please just give a moment and think of our military and all of our first responders from all of the countries all over the world. You know, I'm always trying to stay mindful of the terrible things that they see in their daily work lives, and just incredibly thankful for their bravery and sacrifice. So, happy Thanksgiving, friends. And if you have found yourself alone on Thanksgiving, or your plans didn't work out, or they fell through, or your flight got canceled, or you can't afford a turkey, or whatever, then I hope you enjoyed spending some time with your friends in Boston and Austria. And we love you. Hang in there. And if you are going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Happy Thanksgiving.